been really responsive to is the impact that COVID-19 has had on our society from economic, digital, and a human perspective, if you will. So I think we're all aware of the global economic crisis that has resulted, the fact that individuals who have lost jobs during the pandemic will be returning to a totally different economy. The skills that were useful before, we now need even greater skills. And I think it's highlighted the fact that we need prepared individuals in this space. And so the skilling challenge comes not just for employers who are working with employees to upskill, but also individuals who are figuring out what they will be able to do next. But it also it has implications for students that are being prepared, those under 18, and we don't even know the job titles that some of them will encounter in the future. Next slide. So we know that this is you can go ahead to the next slide, that this is an area. So in June of 2020, we launched an initiative to help 25 million job seekers. It was a cross-company initiative between Microsoft Corporate, LinkedIn, and GitHub. And so we have actually impacted 30 million job seekers with locally in America and across the world. But we also recognize that it is just the beginning. And we know that we've got a lot more work to do. Next slide. So I want to draw your attention because as we look at cradle to career, right, and the skilling needs that we'll have as a society, there's some important recent research studies, and we do these regularly. The 2020 State of Computer Science Education, published by CSTA, Code.org, and the Expanding Computing Pathways Program, highlights many of the disparities that we know exist, right? The whole reason why we're here with NSF Includes is because of the disparities that we see, and we're all wanting to make an impact in that space. So that's one. Another one that was done by Google and Gallup highlights also some of the challenges in computer science education in K-12 schools. And so that impact has implications. Those impacts have implications for what we do today and what we're going to need in the future. But so I want to bring those out as resources that you may or may not have access to or have heard of. Next slide. But so there's a ton of details, obviously, in those research studies. I want to draw your attention to just the first little piece. And Kelly's got some truly significant data that she'll be sharing later. One little one that I want to focus on is the fact that we know that 67% of the STEM jobs coming out are in computing, right? And so as far as filling that pipeline, the pandemic has shown we have a challenge in that space. One of the programs that we have, TEALS, and I'll talk about in a second, addresses the K-12 area. So the fact that U.S. high schools do not offer computer science education is a problem, right? We're not graduating teachers who are certified to teach in that space. And so the TEALS program comes alongside to address that gap. So we just want to kind of focus on that gap from the TEALS program perspective. So Microsoft has been doing TEALS for 10 years, well over 10 years, since 2009. We are positioned, if you will, as a professional development model to help, and I forgot to say, technology, education, and literacy in schools. And I know you can read it, but I always get called out on that. We are working alongside teachers to close that gap in the availability, because the reason high schools can't offer it is because there are no teachers to teach it. And so our program comes alongside of the classroom high school teacher in computer science and helps to build that skill. if you will. Next slide. So our volunteers, this is the crux. I like to say that TEALS is a cross, if you will, between Doctors Without Borders and Junior Achievement. And it's an avenue for software engineers to apply their professional skill in a philanthropic way. And so they volunteer in the high school classrooms every day, every teaching day. If it's a full co-teach model, where we have a teacher who is brand new to computer science, who's never taught the content before, may have never even had a computer science class, our volunteers will come in and teach the class. And as the teacher sits in and learns how to deliver that content with competence and independently, if you will. So they fill in those subject gaps as the teachers develop the skill. Theoretically, it's a 4-year program with a brand new teacher, 2 years in a co-teach model, and 2 years in lab support. When a teacher moves to lab support, they can independently teach 80% of the content. And so obviously, some teachers will come in and go through that much faster, but that is the design of the program. So as more teachers learn, then we can offer more classes to high school students, more schools can offer computer science, and we can begin filling that pipeline at that K through 12 level. Next slide. Just want to draw your attention to the number of schools and programs that we have across the country. I mentioned that we started in 2009 with 1 school, and we've grown. I think it was 1 the first year, 4 the second year, 9 the third, 13 the fourth, and then it's just mushroomed. So these are some of the stats. We've reached over 12,000 students. One thing is about over a third of our students in TEALS classes are women. And so that's a thing we're proud of, and we know that that's a significant measure in our industry as well. But just looking at that network, so there's bound to be a TEALS school near you. Next slide. So one of the commitments that we made in June of 2020 was that TEALS was going to expand to address underrepresented populations. So just as NSF includes is addressing the disparities that we see for underrepresented individuals, TEALS recognizes that that is an area that needs to be addressed as well. And so within the next 5 years, we have been tasked as an organization within Microsoft to add 650 schools that are primarily African-American to our school partner network. So we want to make sure that we're providing strategies and resources directly to that community to increase equitability in high quality computer science education. So we have laid out an action plan and have received our challenge and are marching forward. That's part of what I'm hoping, and you can go to the next slide, hoping that we can develop some partnerships with universities and across the nation as we move forward. So bringing the industry part into it, right? So it is not just a Microsoft initiative. Microsoft launched it, we run it, but we recruit volunteers from all over, from all different companies, large and small. And so there are more than 650 companies in our network, represented through 1,500 volunteers, and of course the impact that we've had on students. So these are just obviously a high, some of the more popular companies that work with us, but we recruit local, regional, and national corporations. Next slide. And we also get our volunteers even sometimes from from government as well. So that's our K through 12 initiative for that early part of the pipeline. Then the skills initiative that also was launched during that time, you can go ahead, is addressing the skilling needs for those beyond. It's really actually 16 and above that this particular element of our program is focused on. And so it essentially is a comprehensive education portal, if you will, to address skilling needs by occupation. So if you go to Microsoft Learn, you will see the top 10 professions, and I think Kelly's going to speak to some of that a little bit later, on what's available. And so what we have done is address what skilling needs do those occupational titles demand, right? And do they have to have 4-year degrees? Some do. We all know that they all don't. And so what we've done is outline, these are the skills and these are the learning modules that you can take to increase your skills. So it's a comprehensive approach. So we have an element on Microsoft Learn, an element in LinkedIn Learning, and an element in GitHub. And so those are to address the direct skilling needs. We also have partnered with nonprofits across the country because we know that they are providing those wraparound skills that our job seekers need. And so we work with them. There's some granting initiatives that Microsoft has put in place through our civic engagement group, and that where we work directly with those nonprofits that are meeting needs in individual communities. Of course, we are working with employers. So between our customers, our business partners, we work together to make those definitions and to make opportunities available for job seekers. And then of course, government, it's an ecosystem impact initiative. And we work with public institutions as well. Next slide. So I kind of got ahead of myself, but these are the elements. But I want to point out though that with the education piece kind of being the center part of that. So whether that's at the K through 12 space, whether it's at the university space, or whether it's with the learning skills initiative offered by the entities that we just saw on the previous screen through the boot camps and the local nonprofit organizations and non-governmental organizations. So we want to just emphasize, and I think NSF Includes understands this inherently, that we're working across all of these skilling sectors to provide opportunities for career seekers, or for job seekers K through career. Next slide. So I think I kind of addressed some of this, but the big thing about the nonprofits is that they understand their local talent, right? And they are a connection to the community. And so when they design their programs, they can tailor them to the needs of the individual. So for example, I'm in Houston, oil and gas is a big deal here. Kelly's in Arizona, other industries are more important there. And so across the country, we rely on our community partners to make sure that the skilling programs and services that we provide can meet the local needs. Those career coaching and mentorship opportunities, connecting them to employment opportunities through apprenticeship networks and other employment networks within a region are so very important. And again, helping those job seekers to complete those learning paths, because I think one thing we've learned is everybody can't learn online independently, right? And so the community that our nonprofits provide helps keep our job seekers on track and making progress in their learning paths and gaining those certifications. So we really value the role that they play. Next slide. And I'm going to go through these a little more quicker, make sure we get to our question and answers. So obviously the critical role of government in this, and that I know that in many of the sessions that I attended yesterday, we had state representation, regional representation, Department of Labor kicked us off. So we know that government plays a tremendous impact in the work that we do, the laws, the tax incentives, the things that enable us as a company, us as a community to make an impact and make change in this area. So we need our governmental partners to help us set the environment for the ecosystem that will best meet the needs for our communities and our nation as a whole. And leveraging obviously data and the most current technologies and sustainability and other areas all come into play when we're talking about developing and designing programs to make impact for all of our job seekers. Next Next slide. So just want to kind of highlight, and then this is my last one. So this is some of the work that we've done in the Houston area. So keeping in mind, right, education, they're in the center. So I work with University of Houston, Houston Baptist University, and we design programs to meet needs of the various sectors. The private sector comes along and creates and designs programs that support, and there's a list of those there. The public sector, we've got Accelerate Houston. We've come across, it's Microsoft in partnership with the state of Texas, City of Houston, City of Dallas, along with other companies and organizations to develop a response to the pandemic to make sure that our students in the state of Texas receive the equipment that they needed to be one-to-one. Hire Houston Youth, there are tons of opportunities in the public sector for us to collaborate to make an impact. The nonprofits and NGOs that we partner with here in Houston, we've got Girls Who Code, and actually that's a national partnership. Actually, all of those are a national partnership. Girls Who Code, NC WIT is the National Council for Women in Technology, also with National Reach. The affiliates there, we all work together to increase the numbers of women and non-binary and BIPOC population in the tech space. Twist is an example of a corporate nonprofit partnership that put on a national webinar series to highlight careers in the tech space. And then we've got nonprofits that focus on workforce development for for 16 to 24. And we've got local partners that work with us to produce engaging activities and for our K-8 space. So these are just some of the highlights of ways that communities can work together through the universities and K-12 institutions in your local region. I think I'm done. Questions, call to action, yay. So high schools, you can apply to be a TEALS partner school. Colleges, nonprofits, you can find your local TEALS regional manager and create student engagement programs that impact and benefit the students in your area. Obviously, industry employers can provide jobs is what we need, right? We need the places for our people to go. And if the companies work with us, we can certainly address those. And obviously, we could all work to lobby our state boards of education and our legislation to enact legislation that will help us to make sure that we are offering the types of courses that we need at all levels of the pipeline, right? K through career. If you go to Microsoft.com/TEALS and go to contact, you can fill out a contact form that will get you to your local person to address any questions that you might have. I see something in the chat. I realized I should have. I'm going to go down here. Oh, that's the link. Okay, cool.
All right, terrific. So I'm going to share my screen now. And just give me 1 second to hold on. I just gotta move this down for a second here so I can get to the slideshow. All right, let's start here from the beginning. I want to say good morning, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Kelly List-Wells, and I am the founder of the STEM Leadership Alliance. The STEM Leadership Alliance is a collaborative that involves bringing together from the major STEM associations to business, to industry, to nonprofits, to schools and districts, but really to change the way that we think about education. By way of background, I worked at the GE Foundation. I was in corporate America for almost 30 years and worked with districts and schools all over the world, and really to come to that process on how do we change the culture of a school. So if we think back from the 1990s urgency to the 2020 action here, a lot has kind of stayed the same. We've had this whole dialogue and conversation about standards and measurements and graduation rates and financial resources and all of these things. But really, in order to change the way we talk about education, it cannot be based on any one organization or individual. It has to be through a collaborative involvement. And again, that's where we have to break down those barriers, and so that we start to talk about STEM in a different way. So when in the chat room, you can just kind of throw this out here and I'll take a look as we go through this. But what comes to mind when you hear that word STEM? It has so many different meanings. Sometimes people talk about it from a technology. Other times they'll say, oh, it's engineering. Or it oftentimes sits inside a science classroom, right? And so when we go back and we look at these STEM facts that are there, STEM jobs, they're projected to continue to grow at 8.8%. So we're going to see that number, and we saw it in Tanya's presentation as she was talking about computer science there, that 67% of those STEM jobs are in computer science. They're in that computing area there. But we have students that are not adequately prepared coming out of high school for college level coursework in STEM. And we have to address that. We have to talk about this minority gap that's there in terms of how they're measuring or majoring in STEM. We also have to look at women, that they only compile 27% of the STEM workforce. And that number has changed with COVID because more and more females actually stepped out of the workforce during the pandemic. So we need to make an adjustment. We need to make changes to how we really think about this word STEM, because there's not really a clear definition, right? People talk about STEM degrees, but there's a disconnect between what businesses want and what education is teaching. And when we talk about STEM in the K-12 setting, we talk about it as a 4-letter acronym that sits oftentimes in the sciences only. There's no connection from what you're doing in STEM to literacy, to what you're doing in your STEM or science class and how that connects to social studies or art or music or any other subject that's there. The problem with that is that students don't learn that way. Individuals, anybody doesn't learn that way. We learn when things are connected and they come to life. So that when I'm doing the science, I understand the math, I understand the literacy, I'm using technology to research, to understand. It's beyond just a tool there. I'm looking at it through the lens of art and the history of it. That's what makes it all together. When we connect those dots, that's when the magic happens, because students then begin to understand how to bring all the pieces together. And they become those problem solvers, critical thinkers. They're thinking outside of the box. So when we talk about this collective impact model, it's not about a single organization, as I said before. It's about coming together so we can re-engineer and revolutionize STEM education to shape tomorrow's workforce and change the world. But this is going to take all sectors to bridge that gap between education and industry by creating those STEM experiences for educators and students. This is the approach that we're going to take to be able to compete in this changing global economy. And it's changing every single day. So we need to take all of those buzzwords, from makerspaces to virtual reality, to STEM, to STREAM, to project-based learning, all of those, and put them into the funnel and really sit down and say, what's the vision? What's the mission? What are the goals? Come together to create that strategic action plan so that we really start to think about how we shape and mold what the learning experience is going to look like for students. And we base all of this on 3 key principles. Now, these principles here were designed with the STEM associations, with CTE, state science supervisors, everybody kind of came together. And what was so fascinating is that when we started this journey, we really started talking about how STEM education, what needs to happen with it, and how are we going to change this. And we came up with these 3 principles and realized that, first of all, we have to make sure that we're not saying everything has to be integrated, right? We don't want to lose the learning of, here's core concepts that you need to learn in math and algebra classes, right? That you have to learn in your science classes, so on and so forth. What we want to do is to take that power and make sure we find those authentic connections. So we're not putting a square peg into a round hole, but rather that we're really seeing, okay, if you're studying this in science, here's my math connection. Engineering no longer becomes just an activity, but it rather becomes embedded into the work, that you're using technology to really research, to learn, to capture the thoughts and ideas and to move on. And then it needs to link to STEM careers, because right now, when you go in and you're teaching a child a subject there, they don't often make that connection on what are those careers that are possible. So when we start talking about digital fabrication, or you start talking about a wearable device engineer, you start talking about those things, that's when it comes to life. When businesses can share, here's some of those careers that we have. When nonprofits come together and are at the table and they're helping to form those programs that can engage students. When we work with universities as well as K-12 system, when everyone comes to the table, we create an integrated STEM ecosystem. And that's exactly what we want to try to do. So real quick here, I'm going to go through this data pretty fast, but again, you'll be able to have access to any and all of these slides as well. So what are the fastest growing occupations there? When we look at it, all of these are technology. They have some sort of, so service technicians, statisticians, solar installers, all of these types of careers, you can see and you can look at what is that median pay. So here's what they're looking at, this growth rate, right? Between 2019 and 2029. If we flip it to the other side, what are the declining occupations? You start to take a look at, okay, word processor, watch and clock repairs, telephone operators, data key entry keyers. What you'll notice though, between those two slides, between the fastest growing and the declining, is really that technology, the critical thinking that's involved. It's moving everything up to a much higher level. And the ones that are declining, automation is taking in. The ones that are growing, it's where technology is really driving it forward. So STEM jobs, right now, there's over 67,000 science jobs that are available. Now you look at technology, over 210,000 jobs that are available. Engineering, 115,000. All of this came right off of the Department of Labor. So all of this information was stats that they were showing. But the important thing is that we often don't share this kind of information with students. So they don't know when they're looking to say, all right, so what are some of those jobs that I could be doing in science or in engineering or in math or in technology? And it's not just one size fits all, right? So whether it's environmental analyst or those types of roles, there are mechanical engineer, or if you're going into data scientists or in mathematics, there's a ton of fields that are involved in that. And it's not just true math and being a math teacher, but you also have finance, accounting, economics. So the labor force is rich out there, and we need to do a better job explaining that. So how do we get to that path? We have to build a collaborative culture. So first things first, we need to consider who needs to be at the table. We have to have student-centered goals. What are we trying to accomplish here? We have to make sure that we're looking at those transitional nodes that happen. So when a student moves from, if they're at a K-5 school or a K-8 school, and then they move on to the next level, right, to high school to college, high school to career, we have to look at how do we ensure those transitions happen in a smooth fashion. But also, what are the essential skills? So oftentimes we get caught up into the basic content of here's what you have to know from a content. But if we don't align those essential skills, such as flexibility, agility, all of those other things that encompass it, we're missing part of the picture there. And it also has to be looked at what is the current state. So if we think back to 2019, 2018, right? Very different world than the world we're living in today. So for example, here we are, we're doing a virtual summit that's here versus being in person. But that's how the world has evolved. And we've adapted and we've been able to use technology to help us advance. And we're not going to go back to that previous state. So how do we break this down so that we make sure that STEM is integrated STEM and it connects the classroom to the real world? So let's start with taking a look at education. So, backspace there. So when we begin with the connection of integrated STEM and education, there has to be a deeper dive in terms of why this is important. Parents need to understand, schools, district, educators, everyone needs to come together. The content has to go across the subject areas so that when students are talking about or learning about, for example, erosion, and they're reading it from their textbook, and they have no idea when it talks about Christchurch, New Zealand, and a major storm, the kids don't know where that is. So whether they're sitting in Phoenix, Arizona, or the Bronx in New York, or Chicago, or anywhere else, they need to understand what's happening right there in their own local community. So we have to have an understanding for students, first of all. Secondly, we need to say it's not automatically jumping into the project. We have to understand the phenomena behind it. We have to understand what's that problem. We're so good at always coming up with solutions, but we need to understand the problem more in depth in order to get to the solution. And when we do that, it leads into the projects that we can solve for, right? So we need to back up and slow it down a little bit sometimes to make sure we're understanding the big picture, making sure things are real world, that it's relevant. Parents are engaged, that we're building the capacity of the educators, that they're involved in this, and that we empower the districts and the states to think outside the box, connecting the dots for them, not adding in new curriculum for them, but building their capacity, because the materials exist. What we have to do is identify the gaps. Once we've done that, we can transform from a disciplinary approach to a transdisciplinary approach. And that's where, instead of learning in silos, that students are taking real world problems or projects, they're applying their knowledge and they're taking it and crossing it across multiple disciplines. So when you have an integrated STEM culture, students work on real world problems, starting with the phenomena, the project, the solutions to the problem. And that's how we'll get there. But next step is that we have to make sure the STEM institutions are part of this. This means businesses, foundations, professional associations, higher education. I saw 80%, right, is representing higher education. Needs to be a part of the table there as well. We need to look at what does that look like? What are externships? How do we have internships for students? How do we bridge that divide between education and industry? How do we make sure that we're preparing students adequately for what those jobs in the future are? Reskilling, role models. I loved how Tanya talked about all of these amazing volunteer opportunities. So there is a ton of opportunity out there for engagement, but we need to collaborate and come together to ensure that that collaboration is happening. And then finally, we need to make sure that integrated STEM is in the community. We have to create this culture that connects all the sectors. When people come and they sit around the table, students are at the center. We create this model here. So if wherever you're sitting at, you bring the people together, you engage in conversations, you make sure everyone is there, the libraries, the out of schools, the nonprofits, and that there's that transition happens for students when it comes down to high school to college, college to work, work to progress. So we want to make sure that students are connected and they understand the process to get there. And the bottom line, there are resources out there. There's information that's available. And we need to make sure that we're working together, because it isn't just about one organization doing that. And so here's the big idea, is that we sit together, we get all the parties in the room. You have the schools, you have the district, you have your nonprofits, your business leaders, you have community members that care. So when those shareholders come together and they start to think about those big ideas, what are we trying to accomplish? What's our mission? What's our vision? What's our goals? How are we going to take all of the buzz that we have around the word STEM and start to change our community to be an integrated STEM community where we're connecting the classroom to the real world? And so we want to take those big ideas. Once you've launched, the next part is establishing goals. You have the short and the long-term goals. What are your learning metrics along the way? Of course, you have end goals, but you have to have milestones along the way. So taking that, incubating the ideas, looking at what are the expertise at the table, what's those financial support that's necessary, continuing to put new ideas into the pipeline, and then moving it forward. Making sure you formalize, you expand, you're sharing those ideas, you're creating integrated STEM ambassadors. And I will tell you, in districts and places where this works, it's the first time they will say that they feel they're being heard and they feel they're really addressing the students. And instead of trying to layer upon layer, new activity upon new activity, instead it's doing a snapshot to say, here's what we have, here's our gaps, but sometimes we can fill those gaps by building our capacity within a school, within a district, within a state, or also connecting with the other resources that are available there. So again, we have to think about, how are you going to create an integrated STEM culture? Who are your partners? Who are you going to bring to the table? Create your timeline and make sure you're breaking down those silos. STEM should never sit just within one subject area. STEM should never sit just within the classroom. STEM is everywhere. It's all around us. The world has changed and we need to change with it. So I want to thank everyone. I've put my information up here. As I said, the STEM Leadership Alliance, we are collaborative. We have webinars that continue throughout the year. And hopefully we're all going to be back in person for July 11th to the 14th of 2022 and sharing those ideas and continuing to learn with and from each other. And I love, even during this pandemic, to have that ability to do the summits virtually like this, but we've also been able to do it around the world. And we're seeing change still happen. So this pandemic, nothing can stop us as long as we're willing to work together. So I'm going to stop there so we can make sure we get to questions and answers. So I'll stop sharing my screen and turning it over to everyone here, and we'll facilitate those questions. And don't be shy. So there was a question about recommendation for finding industry partners in a low resource or rural state. There are some really clever ways that industry has actually started to partner with rural areas. So you might not have a massive plant that's there, but for example, Volkswagen has actually started to do tours of their facility, and it's all virtual. And a lot of companies and organizations have done that as well. So I think one, going to some of the websites of the industries, looking at them, oftentimes too, they have foundations. So they'll have an educational component. So you're not necessarily asking for financial resources per se, but you're saying, are there ways that you can actually participate and be included in working with a business there. I also want to give a shout out to the major STEM associations. So whether it's the Council for Teachers of Mathematics, ITEA, ASCE, all of those organizations also have resources and connections that actually can kind of go back and connect to show how industry can be a partner there. So there's lots of different ways to do it. As I said, either just going straight to the business there, but taking a look at that. And even if you go to the STEM Leadership Alliance, and you can always send a note through that or email me directly too, we'll put up different resources there. I think one of my favorite projects that we did about force in motion is we were looking at roller coasters, right, which is very natural, but we actually brought in an engineer who designs roller coasters. And boy, did that spark a whole different level of interest there. Or when you're talking about roofs, bringing in a roofing contractor. So sometimes it doesn't have to be big industry, it can be small. And so just thinking about in your own local community, what are people that they're doing jobs right there and they do involve STEM, and bringing them to the table to also talk and speak with students.
Thank you.
Any other
So
questions there?
I'm kind of curious, Ben. Can we reverse it? I'd like to find out what some of the individuals in the audience are doing in their local area. Can we do that? Put people on the spot. Yeah.
I'll also add, just back for you, Erica, as well. NASA has really, when you used to go to NASA education, it always felt a little bit overwhelming. They've really spent the last few years kind of cleaning it up and streamlining it. I would encourage you to sign up for their education newsletter as well. And they do some really great activities too. And so if you're looking for, you know, maybe you want an aeronautical engineer to speak to the kids. Now with this whole new virtual world, we have this ability to do that. So I think that's probably the silver lining in the pandemic, is that because technology became so prevalent, that there's a lot more engagement, I think, that's happening versus just being that in person. And they also have some really great opportunities for rural programs.
Hi, this is Kim Nguyen from IUPUI. I want to share with you one of the initiatives that we involve with Eaton Corporation. Eaton Corporation is engaged with the Lewiston Midwest Regional Center Excellence to showcase and connecting with the underrepresented minority in the LSAM project, with hope that will give them the exposure, hands-on, and conversation with human resource to learn what type of STEM job are awaiting for them. And we are in the second year of working with Eaton Corporation, and we hope we will have really impactful report on that relationship. Thank you.
Did you
terrific.
get your LSAMP program? Was it funded through NSF and one of the NSF programs?
It is a supplemental award funded by LSAM. Yes.
That's great.
Exactly.
There is such a need of students, particularly when we talk about STEMs. We're talking about the whole lot of discipline that we mentioned about, and the student, when they get to engineering or computer science in their second years, what I'm going to do with what type of job I should primarily focus on to prepare my skill set. So through the alumni of LSAM who work at Eaton Corporation, they form an affinity group of LSAM within Eaton, and that group will deliver 5 virtual Eaton Regional Headquarters slideshow virtual tour for LSAM students in November. We are working with them to schedule at 5 different locations of Eaton Corporation.
That's nice. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's about time we make a symbol for the student to see. This is what I can do, and see others, people who are just like me, being vice president at a corporation. We had 2 vice presidents in 2019 when we were able to have in-person tour of Eaton Corporation in Michigan. that 3 vice presidents come and talk to them, their pathway to get there, and they are underrepresented minority, and it's so impactful. So the future is good to build up the relationship with industry.
Yeah. And Gary put a comment in there about the STEM Core Alliance. Gary, if you want to speak to it as well, but they, I'm going to let you, since you came off mute here, and just share what your comment was.
Yeah, our alliance involves over 30 community college partners in 7 different states. And the key components of the alliance are that we provide student support specialists at every college that participates, and that's a 24/7 wraparound academic and life support for the student. But the other key aspect of the program is that students that complete the first year of the accelerated math program, they're allowed to apply for paid internships. We've got very good relationships with Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, Sandia, and we have a number of our partners in the Bay Area of California. So we work closely with all of the high-tech companies in that area. I listed Tesla. We work with Northrop Grumman down here in Southern California, and Lockheed Martin have also taken on a lot of our interns. So most of this has been accomplished through the work of our backbone organization, Growth Sector. It's a nonprofit organization, but it's hard. I'll tell you, it's hard work. It involves knocking on doors and working with the companies and talking to them and asking them what they need in their future employees. Get them to tell you what they're looking for in students that come in the front door. We've also got a very high success rate of those students that complete their paid internships are offered employment with the companies, which the packages that these companies are offering is you can come to work and as on a part-time basis and complete your 4-year degree, and then come on full-time, and they also offer to pay for masters and higher degrees too. So it's being able to get these students paid internships makes a world of difference in their success rate and completion rates. So I just wanted to share that it's not easy. It takes a lot of ground pounding and knocking on doors, but companies are desperate to work with educational institutions to fill that pipeline for them. And we in education have to take it upon ourselves to reach out to these employers and ask them what they're looking for and what their needs are.
Absolutely. I've got a quick question too, Gary. So you indicate, so when they, after they pass that advanced math class, they can then interview for the internship. Do you guys screen, does the program screen, or do they go straight to the employers for those interviews?
No, our backbone organization serves as the window of communications.
Yeah.
For example, the national labs will work with us, and they'll provide us the application process. JPL in Pasadena is also a big partner of ours. They provide us with the guidelines that they need for the application, and then we, through our communications network, through all of our partner schools, will solicit students to apply for these internships. Now, sometimes the employers will provide a filter for what the needs are. For example, certain programming skills, so that we will then screen out those students that don't meet that need. But we've also enhanced our relationship with the students and the services that we provide. And I think in our first 2 years, it was kind of like we threw it out there, and the students were on their own for the application. Now we do a lot of hand holding and coaching with the students, so they have a higher success rate.
Yeah, I think that model, because with one of the partners here, Genesis Works, they provide that same interface, right? So they work with the kids and do the wraparound skills that they're going to need as they move forward with the companies. So I think that's certainly something, a replicable element, if you will. I love that.
Yeah, I was going to kind of follow up to, can you, I know you're not, I don't think you're in the backbone, Gary, but what is the magic that the backbone does? What's the value proposition that they offer to these companies?
I think well, first off, they've been doing it for almost 10 years, so I'm sure they've failed forward several times. But being in San Francisco, they have developed relationships with Silicon Valley companies, and since they partner so strongly with several community colleges in the Bay Area, they're able to, when they knock on a door or start a relationship, they're able to say to these employers, we work with school XYZ and they've got a program in cybersecurity, or we work with this program and they've got a biochemistry program. So they serve as that matchmaker function to the employers. When they knock on a door, they already have some insight into what that company specializes in or where their market niche is. So if they go to a company, they've already got one or more community colleges in their back pocket where they can make that connection. I'll tell you one real success story, and I don't want to take up too much time, but Lawrence Livermore National Lab had a desperate need for jobs that they refer to as technologists. And it's that level between the technicians and the advanced degree engineer. And they worked with Las Positas College in Livermore to develop curriculum specifically that fits the employment needs of Lawrence Livermore Lab. And you got to understand, in California, to develop curriculum and to get it implemented, it's a 2-year process. So Lawrence Livermore worked very closely with the college to write the curriculum, to recruit faculty, and then they developed that bridge for students that come into that program are offered internships at the lab and then potential employment opportunities. So to me, that's the best example of the workforce working with the college systems to help tailor their instructional programs to what their employment needs are.
Either of you guys, and I second Sarah's suggestion about some kind of best practices manual, boy, would that help us. But I wonder also if there's any advice for when you have lots of smaller industry and almost no big industry, is there a way to help? You know, it's a lot of one-offs that the companies need. So is there any clever way to help students get prepared en masse for something that's very disparate that either of you guys have heard or any of you guys have heard of?
I don't think there's a silver bullet for that. I think we're fortunate to be in Orange County, California, so we've got a lot of high tech surrounding us. But I've been in private industry for 30 years, and I would suggest that if you're in a smaller area, that you promote maybe a one-day workshop on campus, like a career fair, where you invite private industry leaders to come in and you demonstrate what your school is doing. Where do you excel? What kind of programs do you have? And tailor your presentations to, this is the job force that we're training. Does that fit with your needs? And if not, where are those gaps? What should we be doing to provide future workers for your industry?
And I would also just chime in on that because we've worked with some rural locations and especially, one location, not here in the US, but just within the Philippines, and just kind of that disconnect that they had and some of the issues that they faced, but just kind of coming up with some different clever ways. And so it's not just, there is no magic. There is no silver bullet, as Gary had stated, but there are some different resources that are available. If you just want to email me, Erica, I'm happy to send you some of those connections there. There's some I think you're seeing more and more companies and organizations, as I mentioned, like Volkswagen and some of these others, that are doing more to reach out to rural communities and making sure that they have those connections. So, happy to share some of those contacts and just, ways that you can reach out to them directly too.
Yeah, I think I'll just piggyback and just say that for those kinds of communities and regions, then the concept of alliance and coalitions is like even more important, and because you really do need the power of a collective, if you will, to really kind of hone in on those skills, because they can, as a group, even though they're one-off, you could kind of define skill sets that could be cross-domain. So as you're developing programs to impact the skills can be applicable for different environments. And so I think that it even becomes even more important in those kinds of regions.